We're recording.
Okay, so I'll go first. Oh, let's come back and reconnect. And like I taught high school kids for 100 years, and they come and they go. So I've learned if you have to go, go. We're glad you're here. Come back. It's free form, and it's the principle of attraction rather than promotion. And some of us do need to go home, and if you have to do that, of course, this is all good news. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm a member of Al-Anon, and there's all kinds of different 12-step programs. And I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. I bump into people who think it's a bad thing. I bump into people who surprise me with what they think are bad things. I got sober in 1976, and at that time, I was 29 years old. But the understanding in the recovering community was you're a member of one program for your whole life. And there weren't a lot of people who were double winners. It was considered suspicious. Part of it, I think, was that so many people died so young, so they didn't have time to join a second program. But as the program has developed and grown, so many of us in AA, 7 years in the program, 10 years in the program, 20 years in the program, we're angry at everybody and we're tired and angry. We find a need for Al-Anon. Or, you are the perfect AA and your spouse is the perfect Al-Anon, and you are sponsoring thousands of people and you're full of gratitude and God is in heaven and isn't everything wonderful, and then your first grandchild overdoses. Or your favorite kid overdoses. And you enter a nightmare world that you didn't know existed. And you come into Al-Anon as a parent or a grandparent who is freaked out. And you are back at step one. Everything you knew before is theoretically nice, but it doesn't help you when your child or grandchild is ill. And you have to talk with other parents and grandparents who know this thing. So also, some of us were in the program for a while and we discover we have food stuff. Or we have gambling stuff. Or the S stuff that Tim mentioned. One of my sponsees called me years ago and he said, I've got a secret. Now, secret's bad. Bad. What's your secret? Is I go to bookstores. I go to bookstores. There's a bookstore in Portland, Oregon. It's worth a pilgrimage to. It is an entire city block of books called Powell's Bookstore. I would like some of my ashes scattered there when it's time. And I went in to buy a book and I came out $400 later. Now, this can happen very quickly. But that's not what he was talking about. He was talking about bookstores with pictures and adults and sexual stuff and all the things. And I haven't done a lot of that yet, so I wasn't really very helpful for him. But he told me his secret, and I said, well, give me a call. He never did. But months later, he called me and he said, I have found recovery in Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. There's many sex programs, S program. This one, and I have friends who are in there. I have some priest friends who are in there. It's saving their sanity because they can go and talk about this with people that don't go, ah! So my friend said, I found this meeting in San Francisco and you have to come. And my first reaction was, I can't go to an SLAA meeting. I'm very well known in a small disturbed group. I just can't go around into these things. But he was right, and I went. And it was Old St. Mary's Church in Chinatown. So it's if you know, Grant Street and California Street, basement, Sunday night. A lot of people in the room. Not a lot of laughter. This is not a lighthearted, fun program. AA, they laugh about everything, and NA, they laugh about everything. Al-Anon, no. But, this was a pretty serious bunch. 30 people, 40 people. A lot of men, a lot of women. I don't know what the percentage was, but a lot of men, a lot of women. It was San Francisco, so gay, straight, and everyone in between. Everyone's there. And ethnically, Asian persons and Latin American persons and everyone's there. So I kind of sit, please don't anyone notice I'm here. And the guy sharing, middle-aged white guy, was a sober alcoholic, married family, prominent job. He didn't go into details, but he was a guy with a life. Sober 10 or 15 years, and he started getting bored, and he wanted some excitement, and so he connected with an escort service, and it was really fun. And then he went back, and then he went back monthly, weekly, several times a week. Now, this is very expensive, highly dangerous, very secret. And so he just told his story without blaming anyone else or letting himself off the hook. It was very well done. And then he said this, in this program, the S program, I learn how to avoid the sexual behavior that leads me to despair. And I wrote that down. Because I think it's our addictive crazy that leads us to despair. And I want to know what that is, and one day at a time, I don't want to be doing that stuff. Like with me, it's alcohol and marijuana, and I think about it, it comes into my brain, and I tell myself, I can always do it tomorrow. That's the trick I use. I can always do it tomorrow. I was at a meeting in Dubai last week, and there was this woman with 47 days. And she was obsessed with red wine. And at the end of the meeting, I just said, you can always do that tomorrow. Just don't do it today. And she said, really? I said, oh yeah, tomorrow's going to be a busy day. But today, we're here, and that seems to work for me. So the 12-step programs, we're friends, we're companions, and we're allies. AA can get very excited about only alcoholics. I don't argue that. When I'm in AA, I say alcoholics. Sometimes I go to Narcotics Anonymous when AA is a little too boring. Everyone's recovered and they're so grateful. Narcotics Anonymous will take any addict. They don't ask what your addiction is. They'll take any addict, and that's important information if you need a place to go and just identify as an addict. And it doesn't matter if it's food or gambling or heroin. We're glad to see you. So we're friends, we're companions, and we're allies. And in recovery, I have learned how to talk about stuff. I remember I was 10 years sober, and I was doing some work on adult children's stuff. Now, that's very intense. I did about 2 years' worth of very intense adult children. I went to meetings, and I had a therapist. My therapist was Dr. Geraldine Wasserman Fink, not Irish. And she ran the methadone clinic in Berkeley, which means she was not a romantic. She was a little too Freudian for me, but we got along. She had me lying on a couch. It was hilarious. But it's with her that I said out loud for the first time that my father was alcoholic. I didn't feel relief or joy, I felt shame. I can be an alcoholic. My oldest brother can be an alcoholic. He's been sober a long time. But my dad, I had some work to do, and she helped me. God bless her. She's been a very useful person to me. She said this in dealing with heroin addicts. You get clean. And she said, if you're a heroin addict who comes into recovery, you'll visit a lot of empty places because you've lost a lot. There's things that never grew, never developed, never thrived, because you'll visit a lot of empty places. And that's my experience too, coming into recovery. There's some grief and some sadness. One of my relationships with alcohol was my spouse. In pastoral work, you learn how to deal with people in crisis. And sometimes if you're a clergy person, you're the first person someone in crisis calls. They think you know something and you don't necessarily know anything. But battered spouses. And I read about it, and I've listened to people, and I've been involved in it. And I think I was about 30 years sober when I realized that was my relationship with alcohol. I was the battered spouse. I kept going back. Maybe this time it'll be different. Oh, I've learned so much since the last time. I'm sure I'm not going to be beaten unconscious because I've figured a lot of stuff. And then, boom, just down. So the story's told that alcoholism, drug addiction, is a lot like dancing with a gorilla. You're not done dancing until the gorilla is done dancing. And when I first heard the story, they didn't say dancing with the gorilla. They said dating the gorilla. And they didn't say dating. But you do get the idea that you're on the receiving end of a very large animal. And when the animal's done, you're done, and not 1 second before. And if, so many people are killed. This is such a deadly disease, a killer disease. The young people dying of fentanyl overdoses. It's just nightmare, horror, tragedy. So if you're clean and sober today, it means the gorilla has let go. If the gorilla has let go, you want to get out of the cage. And you don't want to go back into the cage even if the gorilla starts humming your song, which it will do. All of a sudden you hear music, the moon's full, you're a little lonely. Maybe I could have one more dance. And I find some gorillas absolutely entertaining. They're cute and they're fun. Of course, you end up dead, but for a short period of time, it's cute and it's fun. If you're clean and sober, get out of the cage. One of my friends in Las Vegas, parentheses, for a while he was dating his sponsor's wife. Don't do that. It's the deliberate manufacture of misery. Just don't, even if it seems like it's not a good idea. Text resumed. My friend in Las Vegas says he doesn't want to dance with the gorilla, but every so often he wants to pet it just a little bit, Now, if you love an addict, if you love an alcoholic, you visit the zoo a lot. And there's lions, and there's tigers, and there's bears. And then you walk by the gorilla cage. And you see the person you love in the cage. And might be your spouse. That's a special kind of crazy. Might be your mom or dad. That's a different kind of crazy. Might be your grandchild or child, and that's a very different kind of crazy. And you react with rage and fear, and you have to do something because of your love. And so you get into the cage, And you start vacuuming and sweeping and moving the furniture around for the right feng shui. Is there feng shui in Jerusalem? And then you hang a nice picture of the Dalai Lama, perhaps some Chinese poetry. And none of that helps. So then you get between the gorilla and the person you love and you try to pull them apart. And the gorilla turns on us and yanks our arms and legs off. So we have a program too, and it's called Al-Anon. And a lot of the Al-Anon program comes down to stay out of the cage. Let's say that together. Stay out of the cage. But I just want to vacuum, and so we know, and it just is, it makes everyone so unhappy. We're going to meet over by the giraffes, and we're going to talk about our need to vacuum other people's cages. Minding my own business. A lot of things are none of my business. What can I do? What can't I do? Boy, this is the Al-Anon focus, and it. People die from alcohol and drugs. We know that. People also die from untreated Al-Anon crazy because we don't learn self-care. We don't learn self-protection. We just wear out. These are like one of my friends. His dad was an alcoholic and a gambler, which is a nice combination. And we were driving somewhere in Northern California, and it was spring, and there were little lammies and sheepies and cowsies in the field, and they were all it was bucolic and lovely. And there were horses, and I said, "Look at those horses." And he said, "I hate horses." He said, "How can you hate horses? They're beautiful." So the next day, I said, "What's the horse deal?" His dad was a gambler. There were 5 kids. He used to lose the rent money at the track. I hate horses. His mom died at the age of 53. Exhausted. Worn out. And one of his sisters is dying of untreated Al-Anonism. Doesn't think she's worth the medical care. She should just try harder. 2 more minutes and then it's happily yours. I think that the second step talks about hope, that there's a way out. I think the biblical image is, the bird in the fowler's snare, and the fowler's snare is broken and the bird flies free. That's a good image. Or you're thrown in the pit and you get out of the pit. And the third step, we ask a power greater than ourselves. We turn our will and our lives over to the care of a power greater than ourselves. However you understand it. And no one understands it very well except Tim and I. We understand it very well. But no one else does, And I mean, the God that this is the one who drew dry land out of water and created space and time and the sun and the moon and the stars plus people and cows. How do you understand that? One of my Franciscan friends, a Franciscan sister who's been sober a long time, she doesn't talk about God as you understand God, because she's talking about God as you experience God. Where have you had an experience of a power greater than yourself? And sometimes it's at a meeting, sometimes it's at the ocean, sometimes at the mountain. You know, Moses had the burning bush, but I don't expect a burning bush. But I get to look around to find where have I made that connection? And I want to treasure that.
Over to me.
Now it's your turn.
The Fowler's Snare. Is it Psalm 91, isn't it? Kihu
If I
Pach Yakush. Is that the one? Is that the Fowler's Snare, Evan? Does that sound plausible? Okay. So this image of the bird that's trapped. The bird does not belong in the trap, it belongs in the sky. The reason why my addiction was such a disaster is because I didn't belong there. That's why there was such remorse afterwards. And all the bad things I did, I felt bad about them because they weren't who I really was. So I was very confused in drawing conclusions about myself, but who I was based on my behaviour that I felt guilty about. The guilt showed me that that wasn't really who I was. If it was, I wouldn't have felt guilty. A psychopath, I'm told by my psychopath friends, of whom I have none. Psychopaths apparently don't feel that kind of guilt. That you should be worried about. But the stuff I felt guilty about, maybe sometimes eventually felt guilty about, it wasn't always straight away, showed me that that behaviour was not who I really was. Nothing we say, by the way, if I can speak for you for a moment, we don't have authority because we know anything. We've been here a while, and that's kind of it. Is that fair enough?
Experience, strength, and hope.
Experience, strength, and hope. And it has... You know when you're writing a paper for school, and they say when you get some information from somewhere, you need to put a footnote, and in the footnote you say the author, and the date, and the publisher, and the page number, and then you're safe. I saw a little screenshot where someone had taken a photo of a book where the footnote said, 1, this I saw in a dream. That was his footnote. And so half of this stuff, it's just what I saw in the dream of being here for 30 odd years. So that's the status it has. When Tom was saying about the poor woman that died at 53. My other half is a medical professional and in charge of the health of millions of people. And we were having a conversation about something or other to do with health. And he said, whether it's physical disease or mental illness or psychosomatic illness, and then he paused, and then he said, actually, they're all the same thing. And then he carried on to say the thing he was going to say. And it's so interesting. I've known a lot of people in AA. I've known a lot of people in Al-Anon. And certainly amongst the people I've known in Al-Anon, the rates of skin conditions, digestive system conditions, eczema, allergies, there's a lot going on. With the alcoholics, less so, because when it gets to a certain point, people seem to drink. I would drink, but there's nowhere for it to go. And I've seen the most amazing recoveries from physical things. I was ill, so I'm an AA and I'm an Al-Anon. I got sober in AA and I wasn't okay. I really wasn't okay. AA taught me how to function well enough to have a job and to have a mortgage and to pay the pension contributions and to have something of a relationship, but I was not okay, and I was ill a lot with infectious diseases where the pathogen has to get into your system to get ill. Yet I was the one that was getting everything. I'd had this like alphabetical thing with hepatitis in my 20s. Every time I got another one, I thought that at least it was systematic. They were in order. But why? How did I Because I was unwell. There was something that wasn't right, and it found a way to express itself. About the laughter, this is not in any particular order, it's just things I jotted down. Laughter in AA, I have to agree, my Al-Anon home group is lovely, I really love it, but often it's not very laughy. And when people get to suggest topics, the three topics that people seem to come up with a lot are, number one, grief. Over anything, really, and not just death, but small things too, because the feelings are the same, even though the event is small, apparently, because something else hasn't been dealt with. The other two topics, saying no. So someone I know, they were given their chance to do their first topic in an Al-Anon meeting, and it was saying no. And boundaries. Now, when I hear the word no, I feel myself physically drawing back. When I hear the word boundaries, I feel myself behind a wall. And I understand all three topics. But with the no and the boundaries, what I like to do with both of those is to say with the no, it's not that I'm saying no to this, it's I'm saying yes to something else. I'm saying yes to just being quiet at home with the phone off. I'm saying yes to just having dinner quietly with my other half instead of going to the party. And there's a line in one of the Friends episodes where someone asks Phoebe to do some sort of favour, and she says, what does she say? She says,
but I don't feel like it.
I don't want to, exactly. I wish I could, but I don't want to. Not wanting to is enough. I don't have to explain any further. Why don't you drink? I don't like it. Did you used to like it? Yes. What changed? I decided I didn't like it anymore. Do you have any more questions? Kills the conversation, which is fine. I get to go home early and just not have to spend time with other people. But the point is, I don't think Al-Anon for me is about saying no. It's about saying yes to different things. And I don't manage my relationships with complex sets of boundaries and algorithms for how to handle things. With formal relationships, like with students, with sponsees, there are rules of engagement. It's not professional, but there are things which work, there are things which don't work, there are things we talk about, there are things we don't talk about. But with my friends and with people in my family, I don't have boundaries in that sense of this image of something between me and the other person. But what I will have is there are conversations where I will make the positive decision to stay quiet and pray for myself and the other person. So the image of a boundary, my Al-Anon behaviour is like warfare. And I don't want to replace warfare with a wall between me and the other person, with barricades and snipers and guns and dogs policing the other person's behaviour so that when they do something wrong, I tell them they've crossed the boundary. I can't There are formal, like with students, I have to do that sometimes. But I don't want that. I don't want that at home. I don't want rules for how the other person should behave. A couple of other... It doesn't mean that stuff doesn't get dealt with, but it gets dealt with without that warfare and barrier imagery. Couple of other things. About the... has anyone seen the Poseidon Adventure? Now, there were 2 films called The Poseidon Adventure, or something similar. There was the original one with Shelley Winter, which is the good one. That's the one you want to see. We have no opinion on outside issues as fellowships, but I have an opinion on these 2 films. The first one is better. Anyway, what's the point? Based on a novel by a now unfashionable novelist called Paul Gallico. And in The Poseidon Adventure, this ocean-going cruise liner gets turned upside down by a tsunami, and the ship is now upside down, dead in the water. And people have to go up to the bottom of the ship to try to find a way out. And the novel is... I read it when I was 15, but it stuck in my mind, is chilling, because these little groups form. And each group has its own leaders and its followers, and each group has its own dynamic and its own psychology, and the groups are going in different directions. And one group will pass another group, and one of the groups is going to die, but you don't know which one. And then people get picked off one by these dangers. Recovery can feel like that sometimes. The people that I certainly thought, I'm going to be best friends in the same group. They're going to be part of my network. I'm going to be part of their network forever. Best friends forever. And that hasn't worked out quite that way. Sometimes people have got well, and then they get unwell again. And it's frightening. And people drink again after 30 years. People drink again after 40 years. So I want to have a program that gives me the best possible chance of not dancing out of the door thinking that I'm doing the right thing. With the S stuff and the R stuff, the S stuff is like having your own crystal meth factory inside your brain. You produce your own drug. What I've learnt to do is I can't fight that thought. I very rarely get the impulse these days, but it happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. The impulse, the story started, and I felt the rush. And on my phone, I've got lots of things to listen to. And one of them is the audiobook of Game of Thrones. And I switched that on because it would absorb me instantly. And I absorbed myself. I didn't say no to that thought. I said yes to something else. And then 5 minutes later, I was fine. The R stuff, the relationship romance stuff, I'll tell you how the dynamic works for me. I'm empty, I'm bored, there is something fundamentally wrong with me, and so I'm going to find someone who is shiny and special. And I'm going to put on an act which makes the special person think I'm special, and then they will say that you're so special. And then I will say, you're very special too. And then we will say to each other every day, many times each day, how special we are. Except I know I'm not special. So I know I've sold you a bill of goods. I've presented this amazing product, but I haven't got the ability to follow through. And I feel guilty about this. And so I start to find things wrong with you, because I feel guilty. And I secretly know you've done the same thing to me, which is why all the bitterness starts to come in within a few days or weeks or months, but then I'm hooked. And the way it's... See, there's no communication there. The other person is just a mirror. There's no... I don't like to see the books on their shelf in case I realise who they really are. Their names rhymed. Literally, or Scandinavian names. The same relationship over and over and over again. Different name, slightly different name, same dynamic. And the real test, there was always a physical component, and the sense was, we're really communicating physically. And there was no communication. It's like a sort of fake version of communication. That very intense physical feeling of connection with someone was a substitute for real connection, which is why when I spend time with my best friend, for days and weeks afterwards, I'm buoyant because of the wonderful time we've had. With those relationships, you separate me physically from the person, I can't breathe. Because the only time I felt alive was when I felt connected with them through some physical means, because I had no means to connect to anyone or anything except through a physical relationship with a special person. That takes some untangling. That's not a quick fix. It wasn't for me. Last thing about the gorilla and the alcoholics. A friend of mine said, alcoholics are a lot of fun until they're not.
Huh.
And with the Al-Anon side, the gorilla starting to sing my song is, help me. What do you think I should do? How do I seem to you? And that's where I've learnt to say, not all the data are in. I can't even begin to know. Tell me more. And I just let them speak.
I've had lots of obsessions about different things. Some are fun and some are toxic. But if you have a little bit of obsessive compulsive stuff, and lots of us have a little bit of it, some have a lot of it. Over time, it works like this. Obsession, I'm thinking about it 100% of the time, all day long. That can change into an urge, where it's still there, but it's not as dominating. It's an urge. And a little more time, and it just becomes a notion. And I have lots of notion that run through my head. I have a lot of imagination. So the notion of doing X, Y, or Z comes, and it goes. It's not something I'm obsessed with, to the point of someone has to die. There was a famous AA speaker in the States named Sandy Beach. He was a Marine Corps fighter pilot, Vietnam War. Long recovery. He helped airline pilots get sober, because that's a very special group. You think, teachers are a special group in recovery, or nurses and medical people in recovery. That's kind of a magical group too. Airline pilots. It's here, I wrote this down, and one of my friends, his name was Don. He flew for United Airlines and he was alcoholic. Oh, let me find this, because he said it better than I could ever do, and it's way back here. But he'd fly from Los Angeles to Newark, New Jersey. And here's what he discovered. Now, just a moment's pause. I should have it memorized by now. He'd carry Valium loose in his pocket, because you don't want it in that little rattly container. Oh, see, now if I were a more organized person, he said this on the 18th of May, 2018. Dexamyl got me to the airport. I would carry Valium loose in the pocket. Dexamyl would get me to the airport. Valium would get me from Los Angeles to Newark. Then I could go to the bar. Now, a lot of non-alcoholics don't find that hilarious. And he discovered that this Don R., he's still alive in his 80s. When he got over 32,000 feet, he was frozen with fear. And he never noticed that until he got sober. But the drinking and the drug helped him fly. Sandy got a thing going, so if you were a pilot with an alcohol or drug problem, they'd fire you. Which means pilots start covering for each other. Because it's a livelihood. And again, those are death sentences for lots of people. So if you have a problem, there are ways you can handle this. And Don got into recovery, and he thought he was very secretive about this. And he went to meetings, but he didn't tell anybody. And he had about a year of recovery, a year and a half. And the boss called him into the office and said, Tim's got an alcohol problem. Do you think you could work with him? So they knew. Pilots are under observation. And they should be under observation. Mm-hmm. But pilots in Sandy Beach said, anybody can be an AA. You have to know somebody to get into Al-Anon. and you want to, it's relationships, and it's all about relationships. And one of my problems with Al-Anon, I went in as a teacher because my kids drove me crazy. I'd try to help, I'd get involved. When there was an emergency and I got the late night call, I felt high. I felt adrenaline. I felt important. I was the teacher on campus that troubled kids could talk to. That's a sweet drug. And I'd extend myself and then overextend myself and then even do more so. And then kids are kids and they're jerks. And then I'd respond with rage. And I just ended up angry all the time. The reason I left teaching was I had no Al-Anon program. I was busy, and this is an Al-Anon slogan, it's an AA slogan. We're encouraged to act rather than react. Act. Because I react. I'm the youngest child in an alcoholic home. I'm highly intuitive. I react before I know I'm reacting. Highly intuitive. And they did studies of that, people from alcoholic homes, how we develop certain skills. We also go into helping professions. Teachers, we're nurses, we're social workers. We go into the police force in very high numbers. The military, because we're there to help, right? Most police officers I know could use 1 billion Al-Anon meetings because they get burned out and exhausted and mad because they're dealing with crazy people all the time. So act, don't react. Someone comes at me with anger, I respond with anger. They come at me with fear, I respond with, I don't want to do that. I need to be in a centered place so you don't trigger me. You don't throw me off balance. Act, don't react. It's a lifesaver. Live and let live. Which means I get to live and make decisions and make mistakes and be a fool. And so do you. Don't take the bait. Because you just throw out raw meat. I don't mean to offend the vegans in the room. You throw it and people jump at you. Don't take the bait. Because some of us just trigger each other. We've been arguing for years over the same stuff. In my family, that was real true. And a little spin on don't take the bait is don't pick up the grenade. Because some stuff is just toxic. Tim was referring to people trying to engage us and bring us into their drama. This happens to clergy on a regular basis. I had someone come to see me in the last 10 years. Never seen him before. He was a very troubled person, lots of emotional issues. He had to talk to a priest. Okay, so there I am in recovery. And he came to my house, and he was being punished by the devil. And he gave me all kinds of examples, but drinking was part of it, and alcohol was part of it. And I'm listening to this, and his theology is not mine. He had a very vivid image of being punished and chased by whatever is there. And he wanted me to do something. He wanted me to do something about it. And I'm listening to him, and what I'm saying to myself is, when was the last time he took his medication? Because I think this is mental illness stuff. Paranoia and who knows what else. And I asked him about that, and no medication. It's just me and God. Okay. How about I find sometimes that I go to a meeting and meetings are full of the devil. Okay. The literature is full of it. Well, after about 40 minutes, I told him, I can't do anything for you. I really wish I could have, but there was nothing I could do. This man has a very complicated history, and he's way out of balance, and he's way off his meds. And I felt sad and unhappy and out of balance myself. But I can't fix him. It's an appreciation of my own powerlessness. In families, too, it seems to be, and again, I don't have kids. I've taught them, but that's not having kids. There seems to be very little we can do for our own children or grandchildren. You could work with other people's kids, but your own, what do you know? You know? I mean, you're the old man. I couldn't talk to my parents. I couldn't talk to they were impossible. Now, friends of mine could talk to my parents. And I could talk to parents of some of my friends. But the family thing is tough. Step 3. People understand God differently, and people experience God differently. And I think one of the freedoms and wisdoms of the program is it acknowledges that. I know even if you all go to the same parish or synagogue or mosque, your thinking is going to be a little bit different than anyone else's thinking in the room because you're a little bit different. Relax. And I understand very differently at 76 than I did when I was 26. Very differently than when I was 11, and I had a lot of very clear ideas at 11. But you let go of some things, you get some new things in, you do some study, you do some listening, you find some things out. You look, now this is in my own church. For 1,000 years we didn't talk to anybody because we were right. That makes you stupid, by the way, just stupid. So one of the changes of the Vatican Council was a big change in thinking. Instead of arguing with everybody all the time, look for things you have in common. Is there anything we have in common in terms of practice or culture or music or idea? Let's do that together. Well, I want to work on that. It's really easy to start a fight. It's really easy to start an argument. What can we do to have things happen in common? I was very happy. I like Pope Francis, and when he was first elected, he came to Jerusalem with 2 friends from Argentina. One was a rabbi and one was an imam. And the three of them went to the wall. I said, that's the future, I hope. What do we have in common? What do I have in common with you? Step 3, I turn my life and my will over to the care of a power greater than myself. And I do it on a daily basis. I sometimes spin out of control. Narcotics Anonymous, here's their prayer, although they don't say it's a prayer, but it's a prayer. For step 3 and step 7, take my will in my life, guide me in my recovery, show me how to live. That's not bad. Take my will in my life, guide me in my recovery, and show me how to live. And I don't know the future. You have to call a real psychic to know the future, and I don't believe in them. But here and now today is where I want to work out my life and my relationships with other people. And in recovery, we get to do that over and over and over again by telling the truth, by being vulnerable, by listening to each other. I get to take a turn, you get to take a turn. I get to take a turn, you get to take a turn. One of my problems with Al-Anon, 3 more minutes and then you're on. It seems so vague. Like I was trying to grab smoke. Everyone told me I should be there, but why am I there? AA is simpler, don't drink and don't use, go to meetings. My first meeting, I was told, we go to lots of meetings, we don't drink in between meetings, we don't use no dope. I'll do that, and then all of a sudden, life changes. You suddenly notice it's been weeks since you've peed on yourself. I guess I'm ready to start sponsoring people, I'm a pee-free person. Al-Anon's a very different dynamic. And I mentioned this lady Blanche, who I did become friends with, I'm grateful to say. She died in 2000. She said, in Al-Anon, we learn how to keep our sails out of other people's wind. See, I need an image. There's a lot of wind blowing. And can I keep my sails out of someone else's wind? Not every fight is my fight. Not every interest is my interest. I get to say the yes and no that I get to say to some things. And I love it. I just don't want to do it. That can't be enough of a reason. You have to lie to cover it somehow. Last Al-Anon story. One of the things we try to do in Al-Anon is take charge, run people's lives, give advice. I have done that. I have met people, and minutes later I'm giving them advice. I know nothing about their lives, but I know what they should do. And it's a Charlie Brown Peanuts cartoon, but Lucy asked Charlie Brown, how many times does 5 go into 3? And Charlie Brown says, 5 doesn't go into 3. And Lucy says, it does if you push. And I have to watch for those times when I'm trying to force the outcome. That's not turning things over to God's will. I asked my sponsor on one of his good days, I said, what is God's will? What's God's will? And he said, it is God's will for each of us to have a life. Go get one. Which means I get to make decisions, and I get to say yes to some things, and I get to say no to some things, and I get to make a million mistakes, and when wrong, promptly admit it.
Thank you. Act, don't react. And I thought, how do I not react? And how do I then act? having a life where I've cut out all of the optional craziness really helps, because there's just less to deal with. It's like one of those computer games, one of those Space Invaders games. If you've only got one thing to shoot at a time, you can shoot it. If you have to shoot 4 things quickly, one after another, there just isn't the time and you get destroyed. And this being terrified at 32,000 feet, a little bit of biographical stuff. So when I'm in my 50s now, I got sober when I was 21, and I got a job in what we refer to as the City of London, which is the financial district. And I hopped from job to job to job, but it wasn't across, it was up. And every up that I went was more pressure, more stress, more risk. Give me an example. An example is Friday afternoon, 130 employees. We have to press the button on payroll at 5 p.m. so that everyone gets paid. We're in a new business, so people aren't replaceable. If they walk, we can't just bring someone else in. The only people that know how to do what we were doing were the people in the business. If they don't get paid, they're going to walk. It's 3 p.m. I'm £200,000 short. I need to find £200,000 and get the £200,000 wired into our bank account by 5 p.m. so we can press go on payroll and everyone gets paid. And I could do it. I knew who to call. I knew what to say. Being able to do that doesn't help because it keeps you in that situation. Being competent is not a solution. And my life had to be restructured to keep that kind of craziness. Someone else will have to live that life. I can't do it. So that really helps. Second thing, it's learning in the moment in step 10 to pause and pause and pause. And there was a satirical book. It was a travel guide to a fictitious Eastern European country called Mulvania. And you probably couldn't write it these days because everyone would get very offended. But at the time, it was very, very funny. And it was lots of stereotypes and caricatures of various different things. And there was a story of the great actor of the Mulvanian stage, one of whose dramatic pauses lasted so long they actually buried him because they thought he was dead. And that is my aim with the pause. And once I was on the phone to my mother's doctor's surgery. Okay, so my mother was in her late 80s. I'm on the phone to the doctor's surgery. So already this is the high rollers table at Las Vegas. This is a high risk situation. I need information. They have the information and they don't care because it's in some other system and it's not my job. And when it became clear that the woman was not going to help me, I paused for so long. She thought I'd hung up, so she hung up. And but I was just trying to think, what can I say that isn't awful? And I couldn't think of anything that wasn't awful, so I said nothing, and that was the best thing I could possibly do. But here's the thing about triggers. So I can organise my life so that my buttons aren't pressed as often. That really helps. it really helps to slide a piece of cloth beneath the button so when it gets pressed, it doesn't hurt quite as much. But there's still a delay, it's still doing something. The question is, how do I get rid of the buttons? Because it's much easier. There's a Rumi line about it's easier to wear a pair of slippers than to carpet the whole world. Now, some of my buttons are still there, in full, fully present. Others are smaller and now not functioning in the same way, so I'm less likely to be hurt or upset. But a lot just aren't there anymore, or at least they're so dormant they don't get pressed, or if they get pressed, nothing happens. And where that happened for me was in step 4, which is where I first started to take responsibility for my emotions. And you know those American horror films where they think they're getting a crank call from a crazy killer, and then someone whispers to someone else, "The call is coming from within the house." And the call was coming from within the house. I worked on I don't work in finance anymore, I do something else. And I was working on a case of a Norwegian frigate, a navy vessel, which hit an oil tanker in a Norwegian fjord, and the tanker was fine. They're big old things. But the frigate was small and fast, hit it at the wrong angle, it sank. The thing was worth £500 million, big investigation, big court case, and I was involved in some aspect of the court case. And I got to read the witness reports of all the people on the bridge of the frigate, the witness reports of all of the people on the bridge of the oil tanker, the pilot on both vessels, the people who are on the shore, who are monitoring this from the vessel traffic services. I got to read all of the eyewitness reports. No two stories matched. You wouldn't know that the event was a single event if you'd had one of the stories from the frigate and one of the stories from the oil tanker. You would have thought they were talking about entirely different events. The reason this is interesting is whenever I'm seriously disturbed by something, and not just a passing emotion, but it's really gone inside and then it starts to eat my lunch, I'm upset because I've told myself a story, and I think the story is real. I think it's entirely true. It is the whole truth. It is nothing but the truth. What are the chances that I really am right in how I'm saying things? And I've had it proved so often that I'm not. But then there's more than that, and this is where step 3 comes in. So step 4 for me is a lot about unpicking the story to get to peel away. When you go to hospital with a burn, a lot of people put creams on the burn, and the doctors, I did a first aid course because I'm an Al-Anon, and I of course feel responsible, so I did the first aid course. I remember nothing but this: don't put cream on burns. You leave it, or put cold water or ice. That's what I was told. Because when they get it to the hospital, they have to get all the creams off before they can start treating it. And they do it with a spatula. They have to spatula all of this off a burn. I know. And step 4 is like that. I've taken a situation which was bad. Fine. But there was in the 1980s, you'll remember this, 1980s, no offence, darling, but you will. We know each other, it's fine. I hope it's fine. If it's not, that's fine. Anyway, in the 1980s, there was an insurance advert which said, "We won't make a drama out of a crisis." And every single bad thing that happened in my life was a crisis, but I made a drama out of it. And step 4 peels off, scrapes off the drama with a spatula, which is very painful, to get to what were the actual facts. Then you've got something real to deal with. And then you can, well, why did those facts bother you? And it turns out, whenever I'm disturbed by something, I have a plan for how things should be, and a little subroutine in my mind. I use that word for Evan's sake. A little subroutine in my mind is constantly comparing everything I see to how I think things should be. And Bill W. talks about alcoholics being idealists. And this is the problem. In the big book, to wives or the family afterward, there's the line about all of us have a cherished ideal of what we would like our husbands to be, something like that. With the friends of mine and a large proportion of people I'm close to right now are seriously in trouble in all sorts of different ways. And what I've had to do is drop the blueprint for how I thought things were going to turn out. And it's not that I'm giving permission for bad things to happen, because it's not mine to give. It's accepting the facts and dropping the blueprint. But I can't drop something unless something else is substituted in its place. I had all sorts of insights going along through my drinking, but I didn't have anything to do with them because I didn't have a replacement. And what I've found in the steps is that the higher power is the replacement system. And I can't deal with flying my life at 32,000 feet anymore. I can't deal with the news, so I don't. My other half, we have a deal. I said to him, if I need to know anything, will you tell me? He said yes. And it's been a couple of years. We haven't had any notifications through. Apparently, there is nothing I need to know. What relying on a higher power means for me is I have a very simple, stupid day every day. How do you have a life? You have one day after another. And I wake up and I say to God, what do you want me to do today? And it's a very, very special prayer that I use. You may want to have your pen and piece of paper for this. It's almost miraculous. I say, God, what would you like me to do today? There we go. Very elaborate prayer. And then I write it down. And then I do it. That is the whole system. And almost nothing is my business. There are 3 things which are my business. Number 1, looking after myself. I put my own oxygen mask on first. An old woman in Glasgow many years ago said, "You're of no use to anyone else if you're in a devil of a state yourself." She didn't say devil, it was a 4-letter word, which I can't say in public. You're of no use to anyone if you're in a devil of a state yourself. So I need to get myself sorted out physically. Sleep, diet, exercise, fresh air, nature. The next thing I have to do is fulfill some obligations. To play my part, whatever that is. And it's just tasks. to do. It's things to do. No plans, no designs, no... Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? I don't know, and I don't want to think about it. So I don't. I ask God what to do, and it seems to work itself out. I don't know how. And then my job is to... I'm finished on this. I had a problem with gratitude, with the notion of gratitude for a long time, because the idea of being grateful is I have received something which I need to be okay. And as soon as I'm saying I need that thing to be okay, and I'm grateful for being given this thing that I need to be okay, I'm in the most serious trouble. But I knew there was something in the gratitude. I knew that I had a block there, that I shouldn't be grateful or something. And when I first started going to America a lot, they use a phrase that the British do not say. They use many phrases that the British do not say. Behave. Tim, you need to behave. That little, but no. Okay, good. It's gone away. I think of lots of things which are very inappropriate to say. I need to have a quiet talk to myself sometimes. One of the things Americans say is this: I appreciate it. I'd never heard... I kept hearing people saying that. I'd never heard a British person say that. They say other things. And I like appreciation, because appreciation, you see, to me, gratitude is I'm still in there somewhere as the recipient of something. Whereas appreciation, it's like the difference between being in love with someone because how they make you feel and being in love with someone because they're just amazing. And they're just amazing. There is no I in that, and I can do that. So the third thing I get to do is to appreciate things. And that's my way of cutting that, because I couldn't work with gratitude. So I look after myself. I do some stuff over there, series of tasks. When people say, what do you do for a living? I say, I type, and I sometimes talk, but mostly type, which is true. That is the thing that is true. Any name for it is a story built on top. So and that's how I don't have work stress, is I can type. I know where the keys are, and I just press them in a certain order, and then money comes. That's very straightforward. And then I get to appreciate things, because I've burnt out my ability to live any other way. So that very simple reliance on God, the more I've done it, it's a very high stakes choice, step 3. The more I've lived that, the harder it is when I try and live outside of that, in the way the world seems to want me to live, or the way I used to live. I get very burned very quickly. I just can't do it anymore. So I'm in this deal with the higher power for life, because I don't think I have a choice anymore. It's very interesting. We're going to have another break. We should have a break. We'll have a break for 15 minutes.
15 minutes, and then we're happy to take questions about anything. But I want to talk a little bit at our next session about the 4th step and a few simple things on defects of character. But we're happy to take questions, and Tim has lots of answers. So I want you to all to know that.